Dear audience, it is an absolute honor to welcome you all to this much anticipated panel discussion on humanity and society. I'm excited to introduce architect Bijoy Ramachandran, a distinguished architect and filmmaker. He co-founded 100 Hands with architect Sunita Kundo in Bangalore, a studio known for its diverse work across residential, commercial projects, interior design, and filmmaking. His notable projects include the Bangalore International Center, Miraya Hotel, and VDB Corporate Office. Beyond architecture, Bijoy's acclaimed films such as Doshi and A Conversation with Hussein, the contribution to culture and architectural discussion. His work also extends to social initiatives like the Center of Hope in Trichy, supporting over 100 children. Thank you. Please join in welcoming architect Bijoy Ramachandran.
After that colory performance. Well, thank you, the IIA team, Kannur chapter, for inviting me to be. I'm very honored to be here today to interview Alejandro. I'm very, very nervous and not very well prepared. But I thought I'll start maybe just so that we can start easy, to just ask you about the past 3 days in India. You've been here in India before, so what are your impressions, similarities, differences with Chile, just some general impressions of India?
I would say that once in a bus with Rahul Mehrotra, I can't remember why we were talking about this, but he said, remember what's the biggest difference between the religions around the three big ones, being Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, with the ones in India? Those three religions have to administrate scarcity, and religions in India have to administrate abundance. And I would say that's India. It's abundance. The amount of colors, food, races. It's really something that is so seductive and attractive that whenever you come here, you go out with more with what you came. The other thing, you may have seen apparently inoffensive in the previous presentation, the thoughts. I mean, this is not just about being smart or intelligent, which is part of a profession, but it's about being wise. And that's something that is also very rooted in Indian everyday culture, wisdom. And that's also something I've always been very keen to be able to bring back with me.
Are there particular projects or places that you visited that have stayed with you on your many visits to India? You've also been here, I think, as part of the Pritzker jury to see some work. I don't know if anything stayed with you from all those visits that were particularly architectural in a way that have stayed with you.
Well, of course, the water wells is something that over and over, it's a typology that you're looking at. So that's always been overwhelming from the past. Visiting the work of the heroes, Kahn and Corbusier in India, their best work is here. So much better than what they did in any other places. I've been to Chandigarh, but also what was done in Ahmedabad. It's really stunning. But then beyond architecture, in Chandigarh, the rock garden, that was something I was not counting on, and it really impressed me. And then phenomena like Dharavi. You know, how this environment that has a social, economical, and cultural fabric that I guess is a big lesson for us architects. Never again, like in the modern movement, looking for hygiene, get rid of that fabric that is there before. Right. On the other hand, the other evident thing is individual actions, even if well-intentioned, cannot guarantee common good. Right. I mean, on one side is a very powerful and interesting environment. On the other hand, it's a disaster. The sense that basic services cannot be guaranteed, air. So maybe there's a big lesson of our role of form givers to the built environment. Our role there is to do what people are unable to do on their own, and that is the coordination of those individual actions. But they can take care of themselves, all the rest. So we just should arrive there, provide the basics, and then channel that huge energy and capacity that is on people themselves.
Yeah, I thought that maybe Nek Chand's, that wonderful garden in Chandigarh, would have really struck you in a way, particularly with all of that social housing stuff that you showed us yesterday, that there's this kind of innate joy of seeing that garden, of all that detritus put together in this incredible way.
Absolutely.
I also wanted to just, when you travel like this, I mean, you're probably traveling a lot, on work and to give lectures, etc. How do you, we tell our students that you have to draw, you have to, spend time trying to get something into your blood in a way. Do you find time to do that, to sort of really spend time to, or how do you see? Maybe that's the question. Like when you're traveling, how do you look at things? What are the tools you use? Are you taking photographs? Are you drawing? Do you come back to the room and sort of, I'm just curious.
So maybe you're referring, and I don't know if students particularly here know that, but I grew up in Chile, which is an architecture-free country. There's no architecture. So the first thing you do as a student is to pick your backpack and go to Peru.
You mean historically? Or
not even, well, maybe nowadays there are a couple of examples, but I mean, you don't go to Chile to look at architecture. You go to look at nature, maybe, but not architecture. Unlike Peru, you go to see Machu Picchu, you go to see Cusco. There was an empire, the Inca Empire, but then the Spanish crown also created incredible pieces of architecture. That's not the case in Chile. So it's pretty obvious that you're late to jump into the body of knowledge of architecture, and then when going to Europe, a professor said, look, it's like you've been in a hunger strike and all of a sudden you arrive to a banquet. So be careful. You have to, start and, piece by piece. That's why your sketchbook matters and your measuring tape matters. So don't just go into the body of knowledge of architecture or the examples of architecture just like that. It will be too hard. Have a filter, and the filter was drawing, sketching, and mainly measuring. While measuring, let's start by drawing. When you're drawing, because that's more typical, I saw here that still hand drawing and is still a practice, and I think it's very important. Why is it important? When you take a picture, everything has the same value. If you would like to make a sketch of what is in the picture, it would be black. You have to have hierarchies. When you sketch, some lines are more important than others. Why are those more important than others? Then you learned of what you're sketching because you capture something that, for whatever reason, you decided had a higher hierarchy, meaning that more relevant. And this is exactly the same thing that you have to do in front of the blank page. I mean, you can't throw everything. There are things that have a higher hierarchy than others. So by sketching, you understand the hierarchy of things. The second thing is that while sketching, at least that's what I was trying to do, you build again. So you understand that something put on a roof that has some kilos or tons had to go down to foundations. So what is the itinerary of gravity? And somebody has to build that. If you're having a window where you have to interrupt or divert that force. So when you're sketching, you're somehow building again. And if you haven't had the experience, that was my case as a student, well, the closest thing is that you look again have all those forces coming down to the foundations. But when measuring, and this maybe was the best advice I received, in the end, in front of the blank page, you have to take decisions and you have to prefer. In the end, design is to prefer. And there's people that prefer better than others. They prefer. I had to prefer. I mean, we just preferred here to be closer than be to rather back. Right. This is a preference. It's not said. Right. But it produced something. We felt we were too far away from the audience. Why traveling, 27 hours and then be far away from the people? So we move 1 meter. 1 meter makes a difference. Yeah. And when you're designing, 1 meter makes a difference. So you have to measure the things that you, for some reason, find good, and I understand why the distance between columns is better than that one, and then you keep that in your toolbox, let's say. So while measuring, I felt it was like walking on the footsteps on the infinite chain of decisions of somebody in front of the blank page, and in a way you're not alone. I mean, the jump into the void of designing is very brutal, you're very vulnerable in that moment. So it's good that if you saw others, not directly, but through the sketching and drawing, jumping into that void too, well, you're not that alone. You're still alone, but not that much. So I guess that traveling again, measuring, maybe now not with the measuring tape, but you still count how many, steps, how high, and maybe from that, the next other important thing is not so much photos, of course you take, but videos. Because videos capture the life of the place. How people use the place. Sitting in the shadow, looking for the sun. Because in the end, all what we're doing ultimately goes into the background, and the foreground is the life of people, and you're just creating and giving hopefully some quality to that. So make sure that you understood life before doing your lines on a blank piece of paper.
Great. Yeah, it reminded me of those wonderful films that William White made, in front of the Seagram. Have you seen them? So the Seagram has this big plaza in front of it. And they're basically films telling you how people sit at lunchtime to have their sandwiches. And it is where the sun is in winter and where the sun isn't in summer. Right. And so they're just simple things that tell you about, preferences, exactly what you just mentioned. I thought it'd be nice for us to talk about 3 aspects of Alejandro's incredible output. So the first, I want to talk about you as an architect, without the lens of the social work that you've done or the teaching that you've done. And as an architect, of course, you've possibly won every award there is to win, and at a very young age. So I think at 48, you won the Pritzker Award. I think only Nishizawa is younger than you. You're one of 4 Latin American architects who won the Pritzker. I wanted to ask you, as an architect, when you win something that substantial at that age, how do you set yourself up for the next coming chapters of your practice? What are the challenges you set, if awards matter at all? Is there a way you thought about it at that moment? I know that there's a quote on the Pritzker page which you said right after winning the award. But do you look back at that as some sort of a pivotal moment? Or do you look at it as just something that happened, but you had your mission and you were sort of on some kind of a trajectory that really didn't have anything to do with the award or with this recognition?
Well, I think that in the end, you keep on walking. I mean, you've been doing a lot of steps before, and then it may be a jump, but then you keep on walking. So yes, it's not just anything, it matters a lot, but it's not isolated. I remember when you're required to do a speech, choosing very carefully the words, and it was mentioned yesterday in the introduction. And I remember Shigeru Ban, for example, he used, and admiring very much his work in disaster relief, in all he does. I mean, I was in the jury when he was awarded the Pritzker Prize, so a big fan of his work. He used many times the word responsibility. And that's a word that I didn't like, I want to use. I felt it's too much of a weight. And that's why instead of that, I use the word freedom. What a work like this gives you is freedom. I mean, this is a very stupid, and this I told to Francis Kerek when he won. Look, have you seen the film, I don't even know how it's called. It's Niki Lauda and James Hunt.
Yes. What is it? Rush.
Rush.
Yes.
Yeah. So I said to Francis, look, you have to be like James Hunt, not like Niki Lauda. Not because Hunt was a gigolo or a playboy. No, because Hunt won the world championship and needed to win it only once.
That's right.
Then he had nothing else to prove to nobody. And Lauda instead had to win it 2 times or 3 times. I mean, still feeling something to prove. So I guess that when an award like this, in principle, you don't have to prove anything to anybody anymore.
Right.
But the freedom, instead of being used for just doing whatever, I think it's a very important attitude, because then you're more faithful to the circumstances of the given project. If then things begin to become awkward, then you at any given time can say, you know what, I stop here. So that freedom of being able to say no when you know that the project is not going to produce any contribution, I felt it was very important. It's also connected to the size of our practice.
Right.
Until maybe 2 or 3 months ago, we were 15. Now we're 17.
Only 15 people.
Yes. So we want our practice to be as small as possible. Because when you're small, you can say no to projects. You don't need projects. Right. You want projects. If you have to pay the monthly salary for everybody, you're desperately looking for projects, and that makes you compromise in case the circumstances become harsh. And when you're light, and if the project becomes tough, and it has happened to us any time that we have had to go to the client and say, look, if we keep on doing like this, that's it, we're out of here. So we have the red button very, very close to our desk. And I guess it's important because the built environment is a difficult question. Many interests, and some of them fair, some of them not so much. It doesn't mean, this is the other side of the coin, that difficult, complex questions do not have a perfect answer. You have to learn to live with a good enough. Right. If after having done housing or even buildings, if you win those battles 51 to 49, it still makes sense to have done it. Right. But if you're looking that you're going to be 49 instead of, no, then you quit. So we have learned to be able to resist the not optimum, the circumstances. The builders were bad, the politicians were bad, but and still made sense. Well, you move forward, but you need that freedom as a reserve. So I guess that's the way we keep on having the word there to remind us of the need for the freedom for delivering quality.
Yeah, I'd like to quote from your your Pritzker speech just to reiterate what you just said. So you say, looking into the future, we anticipate freedom. The prestige, the reach, the gravitas of the prize is such that we hope to use its momentum to explore new territories, face new challenges, and walk into new fields of action. After such a peak, the path is unwritten, so our plan is not to have a plan. To face the uncertain, be open to the unexpected. So it was quite an incredible. I thought maybe it'd be interesting also, as part of this thing on architecture, to talk a little bit in detail about the buildings themselves, and maybe you can, in general terms, not specific. So when I first started looking at there's a very thin total volume on your work, and the first half of it is all your practice projects, and then the second half is all the social work. And so I started from the beginning, not having reached the social work. Of course, I was aware of your work, but then as I was looking at it, I noted down these kinds of things. I said, oh, Alejandro looks like he's interested in the idea of collage, so he's jamming up all kinds of shapes together. There are angles and the geological proportions. Some of those buildings are so massive. Or then he's also interested in the skin, maybe the thickness, the shape, the interstitial space between the skin and the building, like that wonderful building with the timber infill. And he also has a kind of unique response to context. That Garib house is an incredible thing. Do I do a flat roof for publication, or do I do a sloping roof for practical reasons, and not get published ever? And then you also say, structure is architecture. So I just wanted to, and of course, as you go through and start reading the interviews, etc., and seeing your lectures, you see that none of this is capricious. You're not coming to this with the idea that I want to do geological things or I want to do the skin, but it comes, so I want you to talk a little bit about process. How do you get to these buildings, some of which are incredibly powerful formally, but what's the genesis? You described a little bit yesterday, but maybe you want to get into the nuts and bolts of it. So one is, what's the process like? How do you engage with the client? How do you get to the bottom of something? And the second is, how do you collaborate with your team? What's that relationship? How do you come to something that you're happy and you're proceeding with?
So let me start by the last before I forget. Well, first of all, you said team, and that's crucial. I cannot design alone. I mean, it's how do you call when you play tennis? I mean, you need a sparring, or it's. Yeah. I mean, you sparring, need at least one, if not more.
Jamming.
Yeah, and the reason is to bully the design as much as possible. We are so mean with our designs. You have to temper that design before it goes into the world. I mean, from every point of view, not only formally or aesthetically. Also, I mean, is it answering the question? How many moves are we? I mean, if you're answering if you need 300, times to win the why do you make an ace? I mean, it saves so much time. The way we collaborate is by mocking our designs, by being mean, and so if somebody would witness a design session in the office is so politically incorrect. I mean, it's almost embarrassing. But that's the only way, I guess, that you have to treat your thing that you produce. Otherwise, you are too in love with the things you do. Is like, again, using the tennis analogy. I remember that Nick Bollettieri in the tennis academy was training the players, and the only instruction he had was hit it hard.
That's it.
As hard as you can. I mean, if it goes into the other field or it stays in the net, you will learn that. For now, you need at least 200 kilometers an hour. I mean, that's the speed of the ball in the built environment. The ball comes very fast, and if you have to hit it back, it has to be as hard as that. The counterfactual. The other alternative would be that you're so interested in your style, your forehand and your backhand, and then you begin to look at your own style of playing, but then the balls are passing on your side. So that is like equivalent of being too attentive to your handwriting or your calligraphy. And you should be more interested in what are you writing, not, I mean, hopefully that they understand or your staff understands your own handwriting. But the focus is somewhere else. So the question of form and style and it's something that it's inevitable in the end. I mean, you're recognized by your handwriting. You can't avoid it. So put the focus somewhere else. And this is the kind of opinions. And we have an open space, all the 15, even though we're working in different projects. At any given time, somebody working in a different project can have a say about this and ask and question. And actually, the less they know about the project, the better, because coming from outside, as an outsider, not knowing the circumstances, somebody was asked, but what is that thing on top of that structure? If you're too much into the problem, then you consider that as an inevitable thing. But from outside, that's the way people in the city will look at your things. You're not there to explain the project. So you better make sure that with no context, with no information, it still makes sense. And this is what we try, again, not to replicate. This is naturally the way we have found it's fair to design.
In many of your presentations, you start with this X equals to question and then urban form or use. So, you have all of these parameters and it's different for every project. Does that come at the beginning? Are you writing in the beginning or thinking about things in the beginning? Or is that sort of something that comes as you're working on, that the parameters reveal themselves to you as you work on the project?
It changes a lot. I thought I had one of the slides with the sequence because it's a back and forth project. At first, you intuitively, for a given project, kind of know, well, look, here in Switzerland, the building code will matter. So let's make sure that the code is analyzed and studied very carefully. It was less obvious the issue of emotions in Switzerland. But in the end, it matters. They are human too. But other dimensions that begin to appear or that were obvious at the beginning then prove to be, I mean, in the question of the sketch, not high in the hierarchy. I mean, if you put structure, of course a building has to have structure. You can't be thanked because the building didn't fail, because the structure was right. That's the minimum thing you knew. But in the China project, in the Novartis project, the basement was already there for different reasons, and we were giving the columns where you could land your building, so the structure mattered a lot because it gave there was a basic constraint. So in that case, structure matters.
It's more important,
If you're doing a very tall building like the ones we're doing now in Albania, a building like that weighs 400,000 tons. The structure is the architecture. So depending on the subject, then it goes back and forth. You put more or less what you think could be relevant for the design, then you jump into immediately to okay, how would this translate? Something not working. Then you go back to understanding the terms of the equation, go back to design. So it's an iterative process until you fine-tune and there's a moment where big things begin to be self-explanatory. Then you know that.
And regarding tools that you use, I mean, of course, do you make models? Is model making important for you? And also, I want to ask a little bit about other tech tools. Are you using, any AI? Are you using, what kind of softwares are you using to visualize or to help you imagine things?
Okay, let's wait a moment because I get distracted.
Do we get some gifts as well?
So,
Yeah, about the tools.
the tools. It's also connected to the type of project that you're dealing with. Sketch, I would say, is always the starting point. Every now and then, depending on the nature of the project, a model as a way to understand the core of the proposal, not as a representation, but as a way to identify what is the point of the project. And maybe as a side comment here, I remember it was in a hotel, and the only thing that were available there were the soaps, in the, the typical rectangular soaps. And I think we were doing a competition, and actually it was the innovation center. So the only way to understand the corner was with the soaps, and that was the model, the soaps. And it had many consequences, because it had been a worry, a preoccupation from a time before, that we felt that design what we understood as this kind of too many gestures, folding and too much sauce added to the thing, was in the end was too affected, too baroque. So we said, is it possible not to design? That it's a composition, it's not a design. So the more stupid the pieces, the better the way they say they're clearer if they connect and do the job, or if they don't. Also the failure arrives very clear. Otherwise, you begin to draw and put many things and then you disguise the mistake. With the stupid pieces, if it's a mistake, it's very evident to the eye. So many of the projects that we've been developing on is not a design, it's a composition.
Right.
The more stupid the components, the better. It's also connected to this interest that the structure is the architecture. When the structure is finished, the architecture is almost finished. And if you make the mental exercise in the things I showed, almost all the projects are basically the structure. We're living in an age where, make the exercise in all the cities. I think it's a worldwide thing. You see the structure going up, and when it's finished, and you see the rendering in the billboard and on the street, the distance between the structure and that rendering is huge. It's impossible to recognize the image, the final image, with the structure. We would like that when you have that rendering and then the structure is finished, it's pretty much the same. It's a way to physically resist the test of time. We're interested. I mean, if you're going to spend energy, spend it only once.
Right.
And make sure that it will last physically, but also culturally. The moment, the structure, cuts the bullshit right away. And it's a very interesting way to eliminate the superfluous, the arbitrary. So stupid boxes and structure as the architecture tends to be predominant in what we do. In a more conventional architecture, when you do social housing, it's the only way around. If you don't do that, you're out of budget and things don't get built. So I would say these are the kind of things. So for that, models. SketchUp we use a lot. Of course, everything now is in BIM.
It's already a model. Yeah.
It's already the model. So because everything in the end to get coordinated properly, BIM, it's a big shortcut. We were doing, and this regarding tools, we were doing a project in one of the projects we were doing in Albania, and for different reasons we wanted this project to be really special, even to ourselves, to do something unexpected or that hasn't been seen before. Again, there were reasons for that, not just because we wanted. in a way, the request was that. So we started doing our typical exercises with sketching and looking at references or things that we admire, that adhere. But at some point, one girl in the office, and we asked, she knew about AI, so we said, can you make a test with the same, let's say, parameters of the equation we want to solve, and see if AI is able to produce this unexpected, unseen thing that we were looking for. And what came out was that, really, that's it, was not enigmatic enough, was not mysterious enough. So until now, I think we're still, with natural stupidity, are able to produce better outcomes in that direction than the artificial intelligence.
Yeah, but it may also have something to do with the prompts. No?
Or maybe we didn't, I mean, we were so stupid that we didn't ask the right question to AI. But so far, but again, we have no bias against any tool. If it provides you something that is more efficient, it eliminates potential mistakes in the future, we incorporate everything. We don't have a bias in any direction. Not extreme faith in technology, nor rejection. The same way we are not romantic about sketching. Each of them has just a very powerful outcome depending on what you're asking to that tool.
Sure. Yeah, just very interesting, Alejandro. There's this wonderful dichotomy, these two terms that Khan uses, form and design. So form is this kind of abstract, what is a monastery, what is a school, what is a public space? And design is circumstance. You're confronted with a budget, you're confronted with a particular site or a limitation in technology, or whatever it is, that you're now reacting to those circumstances. And in many of your presentations, what I find really illuminating is your response to those circumstances, that in a way, particularly in that wonderful project, which unfortunately you didn't show, the one in Buenos Aires, where you bridged the railway tracks to make an incredible connection. It's this reaction to a difficult situation, that what am I going to do with this bank in the slum, I understand that really well, this idea of circumstance and your fleet-footedness in addressing circumstance. I'm curious about your own introspection of the more abstract genesis of your work in terms of form. What are like you just mentioned, this idea of diluting it down to the bare minimum essential, that wonderful winery that you did, which has got just these 3 objects, or that Basel museum, which again is in a way a composition that is almost stripped of any artifice. I wonder if there are some things like that you always are checking yourself in a way to come back to this kind of idealized, formal, the beginnings of things. And of course, when circumstances come, the two come together and you get then this result.
It's a very interesting question, and I think I owe a lot to a professor I had in the last semester, in the 10th semester at the university. He had a reputation to be a really bad guy. I mean, you have your things pin up there. It didn't happen to me because when I met him, he was already older, so softer. But you go into the pin-up and he would look at the thing and give you a lighter. So burn your thing. So that was the comment on the project. And that attitude remained, I mean, you always try to look at your own thing. Should I, put the lighter or not? But what he was really good at, he would say as if it was a riddle or a kind of, had just one answer. He would say, how many ways are there to enter in architecture, to access? And you were in 50 year student, well, I know millions, but there are billions of buildings. No, there are 3. How come is it possible that somebody has, squeezed the ways to go into a building just to 3? And that didn't matter if it was true or not. But this capacity, or at least potential, that things could be reduced to, you go, you have something that pops out, so you receive a person, or you have a volume going inside, so you're sucked in, or in between the two, maybe you have stairs, ramp. So, but the capacity of putting the same category, ramps, stairs, you think you're doing different things, but what his mind was, no, you're doing just one. That's the same thing. Right. And with the same attitude, he would say, for everything, so what's the problem in a tower? And we say, well, how many you choose? Have millions of problems. No, in the end, what matters is the crowning and the way you land on the ground. Yeah. All the rest, you do facade, you do whatever you think, your stuff. In the end, what matters is the crowning and the landing. And that stick with me. So when you're doing whatever you're doing, and in the end, for the reasons to say your thing is like a cube, I try to ask myself, as if it was a kind of right answer, so what is the problem of a cube? What is the problem of a linear structure? And he would say, the problem of a linear structure, how you end it. When you have a repetition, how you end the structure. It just go on endless. The moment you're formulating your shapes, and immediately, more than being in love with the cube, with the tower, or with a bar, whatever it is that you try to identify here what is the menu of the lighter, of that structure. Right. Can I make it healthy enough from the very beginning so that the basic sins of the structure were eliminated right away? So from that point of view, the way I kind of visualize it is like you have a toolbox, and then you have the problem, and depending on the problem, you open your toolbox, and your thing is to pick up the right tool. Right. Because if you only have one tool there, and you have a hammer, you look at the world that everything is a nail. Right. And sometimes things are not nails, and better make sure that your toolbox has enough, and this is the way of traveling, looking at others' projects, and yourself doing things that maybe one day, this idea, you put it in the toolbox, just in case. So right. I guess that our task is to have the toolbox as large as possible, so that when you are asked, you pick the pertinent one. Pertinence matters a lot. And then the difference is that normally a tool is to modify whatever you receive as matter. In this case, once you pick up the tool, which is architecture, you have to modify the tool. It doesn't remain as a hammer. It may slightly move in one direction or another, but I would say that's pretty much the internal work. Once you pick up the tool and you put it out there, it goes into the office and everybody bullies you.
Well, that's a wonderful segue to the next. So the first was architecture and your sort of output as an architect. The second was this idea of you as a provocator, as someone. So this toolbox analogy that you make in a lot of your lectures. Are we out of time? We have 2 more sections.
That was the first section. That was the first section.
Next year, same time.
Alejandro. Program, but I can't go forever. But if the program has to go, or you have to go, whenever.
Yeah.
There's
a bell too.
Yeah, if somebody wants to leave, there's no problem. And then the gifts want to come in, there's no problem also.
Yeah, we're serving dinner in here today. So the provocator question, this idea of the toolbox, you said that you came out of college and you knew how to do houses and you knew how to do buildings. But when you came out of college, you were doing whatever. You were doing bars and restaurants, and you had to figure out another tool which you were not prepared for. And then as you went on and got other work, you started being confronted with new demands that you have no skills to really address. So the question about the provocator is that as you were practicing in when you were, again, the same year that you won the Pritzker, you were invited to be the curator of the Venice Biennale. And you had a really provocative exhibition program, the curatorial note. And of course, after the exhibition also, there was a lot of back and forth in terms of the feedback from the exhibition. So the question, the basic question, at least for me, was what exactly does an architect do? What is the idea of beauty? How do you evaluate something that is beautiful and, you know, in the world of architecture? I want you to talk a little bit about this idea of provocation, and also if you can reflect on the time as a student. Were you always like that? Are you sort of a person who is thinking about things in those sorts of terms? And is this Biennale a part of something that, you know, was always bothering you about our work as architects?
Yeah, well, as a student, I was a pain in the ass, absolutely. I remember going into studios to understand what was a subject and wanting to do the opposite just for the sake of doing the opposite.
I think your fifth standard professor was scared of you, Alejandro. No lighter for you.
No. I mean, he wasn't scared of anything. No. So I remember and maybe that was a turning point in the fifth semester, starting third year. Private house.
Yes.
And then, in principle, there's this assumption that the better the client or the more sophisticated the client, the better the architecture. And then the subject of the studio was the space, and of course my point was to prove that there was no space. But I pick up a taxi driver, a cab driver house. Because of my environment, my father, friends that come from a modest origin, and I remember my father had a friend that was a taxi driver, that had the refrigerator in the living room because it was a sign of progress and status. And I thought, well, has that to do with what discussed in the university with Heidegger and the notion of dwelling and this big philosophy? And the guy wants to park the taxi inside the house because it's a source of income. So, yes, I was interested in being as rebellious as possible for the sake of it. Maybe the political environment in Chile helped at the time, last years of dictatorship, and you're surrounded in an environment where you're a non-conformist. The second thing in that time that I still look at my books and sketchbooks and was speaking in complicated. I mean, it was impossible to understand what I was trying to talk about. I mean, using very strange, sophisticated words to explain in the end very simple things. And so this attitude of overcomplicating things, in the end, I began to be rebellious against myself. I mean, what is this bullshit that you're talking about? I mean, it is incomprehensible. Enough of that. And that was the moment where I was invited to teach at Harvard, and the environment was exactly like that. And sorry, I mean, this is about many anecdotes, but I guess it explains the things that in the end mattered. When you're teaching at Harvard, and you know, Anupama, you have the midterm reviews, and then you have the final reviews, and so all the other professors there, you're invited to reviews, and you invite them to reviews as well. And that was the first time I was going out of Chile and right straight to Harvard in the year 2000. And then all of a sudden I'm invited to this panel. I sit there and I see in front of me these drawings, and I didn't get a thing from the drawings. I didn't know if they were plans or sections, or I mean, this kind of datascapes were, you know, trendy at the time. So we were sitting in this panel with 4 or 5 professors. The students spoke for 30 minutes. I didn't understand the word. And then I saw the review panel, and each professor, you know, commenting on this thing that I didn't understand. And the comments were even more obscure. So I remember the thing approaching to me, and there I was asking myself, what do I do here? I mean, do I pretend I understood and I throw these even more complicated words, or I confess that I didn't understand a thing. So I asked the students, and I opted for the second, and I said, look, imagine I'm your grandmother, and I'm not an architect. And in 3 hours from now, you will call your grandmother home and tell how it went. And your mother asks you, and what did you do? Can you explain to your non-architect grandmother what was the thing you had here? And this theme of the subject of the multi-dimensional connectors of flow, in the end, was a pedestrian bridge. So once you know that that is a pedestrian bridge, you begin to ask the simple questions. How do you go up? I mean, what's the slope of the ramp? How long does it take? And of course, the pedestrian bridge was diagonal because it looked very nice, but then it was a much longer walk. It didn't make any sense. It's much more material. So out of that, I mean, there was a risky moment. I mean, if in that context you play this is the emperor's cloth thing, no? But then you can bounce back, and that was it. But I guess that was the moment in which, more than the provocateur for the sake of it, is like, in this context, if there's rarefied air,
Right.
the first thing is your task is to, let's make some clarity. As a consequence, you may, create some trouble, but there's not an intention in itself. It's just the kind of things you need in order to do your work properly. So it's never an intention or an attitude. It's more of was a consequence.
Well, the GST experience, I mean, we'll talk about it in the next, hopefully we have the time for that, but when you went to the GST, it was the year 2000, and you told me last night about this moment when you had to audit your class. You had to go for the show and tell and pitch. Do you want to tell us a little bit? Because for me, at least going through your biography, it seems at that moment, going to the GST and being put into that position where now you have to sort of, pitch something interesting, seems to me like a sort of seminal moment. At that point, somehow elemental gets formed, or I don't know if that's the right assumption to make, that the genesis of this social agenda gets articulated in that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And so a couple of things here. And I think this may be useful for the ones that are working in countries like India or in Chile, that in a way and in the periphery of the world. Right. You will be the center just for a question of critical mass. You have more people than everybody else. It will never be the case in Chile. But I think it's an important question. How do you, instead of complaining or just, I wish I had the resources and the means that the Europeans or the US has, poor me here in the corner of the world, no resources, the society doesn't understand what I'm doing. So you're always kind of daydreaming about what it could be where your context not poor or far away or whatever it is, or provincial. I mean, where the colonies and the center of the empire is somewhere else. So after, and I will tell the story that you're asking, but after that, I'm jumping now into the conclusion. In the projects from that year on, we began to do in Chile, we were asking ourselves, what can I do here that the Swiss or the US can only dream about? So, for example, in Chile, I can make the CMS Tower, the platform of wood with no handrails. In the US, the project we did in Texas, I mean, after everything was finished, then the security expert arrives, and it's full of handrails because the design in the US is driven by the fear of being sued. Lawyers, in the end, is what, guide your design. So when doing in Chile the projects we do, because, I mean, in Venice, there's no handrail. I mean, pay attention, otherwise you fall into the water. Of course, it's not to an extreme, but in there, you can keep the integrity of the design, and more than that, I mean, if it's commonsensical, well, don't do moves that's strictly necessary. So many of the projects we do, when we have the center of the empire coming to the colony, they are envious, not us. So this was the attitude that I was trying, I mean, and I didn't solve it until maybe the night before going into the studio option, going again. I mean, the scheme works that all the professors present their subject, students choose your subject. There are more students than the professors, so if you don't have a good enough subject, nobody chooses your studio, and that's it. You go back home. So when I looked at, and this again is a question, maybe businesses do that, and this was more of a understanding what your role is. I mean, if you were, playing in a field, you want to understand that you are well positioned in the field. So I looked at who else is teaching here. So it was Rem Koolhaas, Rafael Moneo, Herzog and Demeron. So a third of the students would choose those architects just because of the name. Right. 1/3 out. The other third were the studios that were traveling sponsored to a place. The Middle East studio, the Tokyo studio. I had no name, no budget to invite anybody anywhere. What do you do? So the theme of the studio was, and I was interested in eliminating arbitrariness. So the more tough the circumstances, and that was emergency housing, you're not giving any room to do the second or third derivative. I mean, it's one nail, one hit, that's it. So I said in an auditorium like this, so I would like to work in emergency housing, but given we don't know where the disaster is yet, we have to wait. And the moment the disaster hits, only then so we better prepare and anticipate what is it. And this created such an anxiety that after the presentation and during the next coming weeks, all the school was, sending images. There's a landslide in Venezuela. There was an earthquake in the Middle East. So the whole school, looking at where where some relief was needed, and the challenge created that the best students chose the studio because, feeling challenged it triggered something. And because of that, Jorge Silvetti was the chairman, felt relieved because, of course, it was a big risk to have invited me. And that led to the second most pressing thing is social housing. And because of that, at Harvard, you meet the right people. I had the luck to meet a Chilean transport engineer studying at the School of Government. And the way the people in policy making think is so completely different from what I was trained. So again, you feel so ignorant, so back behind, that then you try as fast as possible, and this is connected to some students that ask and advise, be as nerd as possible. I felt I was awfully late. I had to swallow a lot of information. Luckily enough, you can study yourself, that's one way, or you can partner with the right people, that's a shortcut. And so find people that are smarter than you that will help you in understanding the key to jump into the void.
Yeah, the genesis of Elemental, this is I think 2001, maybe 2000, yes. Yeah, so with this Chilean engineer, and you call it a do tank, not a think tank, which I thought was very clever. But the thing about Elemental, and particularly the first project that you did, this idea of finding land close to work, which is usually not the case, and so how do you manage the resources and doing half a full house in a way, or half of an ideal house. Yesterday we talked a little bit about that, and we had a discussion with friends here as well. So we look at it in a way as architects do in terms of aesthetic. Or it looks like that, or they have certain reactions to it. But there's something ingrained into the way that it is designed. And I would like you to talk about that a little bit in terms of particular dimensions, materials, the logic of putting that project together, and the genesis of that. We're ignoring the bell for now. Yeah.
Well, it's like when you're on the road here in India, you horn and nobody cares. I mean, it's not that you go. Yes, it's true. I mean, when you're giving such a limited amount of resources, then every single move matters a lot. Yes, structure is what was really important. But again, there was some. So let me one step backward. For us architects, we tend to look at something and judge it in itself. It's hard to compare because being, let's say, an artistic object, what is the alternative to the artistic object? I mean, if Gehry did the Guggenheim in Bilbao and somebody wants to criticize it, well, what is the other Guggenheim that you can then criticize? It's so unique. And the value in architecture, and more, let's say, artistic architecture, is uniqueness. Right. The less it can be repeated, the more value. It's like an original in art, no? But in engineering or in policy, if something cannot be repeated, the value is zero. So from that point of view, from an engineer, the way Andres Jacobelli, the guy I met as a partner, I mean, scale, being able to be replicated, that he was in complete other direction in which I was trained. So, that being said, for them, looking at what could have been the alternative is a natural way to prove in business, I mean, if you are improving or not. So, he was always in seminars looking, okay, with that money, what is the market doing? That was not in my DNA for how to explain a project, as it's so natural in policy or in engineering. So, if you still look in architecture magazines at the first project, I mean, and that's supposed to be good, I can't get the point. I mean, but again, it's what could have been the alternative? And then I showed that box in that periphery. Well, that's what is done for the same amount of money. So normally in architecture, we tend not to show what could have been different had you not done your work in the way you did. Right. That's one thing. The other exercise I encourage you to do, if, I don't have time here, but if you go to Google Earth and look for Iquique, the city where this project was built, and look for Quinta Monroy, and land down there and go to Street View, of course it will show you the project and being transformed and everything, and many magazines sending journalists there to prove how awful it is now. I would ask you to do the exercise that when you're on Street View, turn the camera 180 degrees and look what's in the other side of the street. That in Chile, believe it or not, is middle class. So actually the story of that project is that this was an illegal slum in the sense that it was illegally occupied, and then where the families were taken out for the construction to take place, the neighborhoods created a big force to resist the coming back, because it was a bad place connected to drug dealing. So they were resisting the families coming back, right, for maybe for good reasons, because they have this formal property for that, but the Chilean standard, middle class, maybe low middle class, but it was in the city center. When the families finally came back and the project was finished to be built, then the dwellers of those units began to complain about the neighborhood because the value of the units was going down because their houses were not good enough. So good, or the optimums, are relative. Right. Compared to what? And this is something that, I mean, if you're published in a, let's say, political economy magazine, everything goes perfect. If you're published in an architectural magazine, the backlash is very bad, because we're not used to understand the constraints. Right. What were the circumstances within which you gave your response? Still, only with doing construction, in principle, should have been enough. but architecturally speaking, we felt there was something missing. And it might be a very tiny detail. It was the only thing that we had with available resources. You may look at those pictures, or if you know them, have at the back of your mind, there's this kind of plinth with a house, stairs, and then a duplex on top. The window of the duplex on top has the parapet below the window painted black.
Right.
Because we wanted the window to feel as a double height window.
Right.
And this is Adolf Loos Tristan Tzara house.
Yes.
You know the Tristan Tzara house? You have it in the back of your minds, 1920s in Paris. It's a 7-story house, but you look at it, it looks as a 3-story.
Because it's combined.
Because the size of the openings introduce a different scale. And we knew intuitively that in a 3-story building, if we just have windows on the conventional social housing standard, it looks as social housing. This very minor thing of trying to create a double height window introduce a civic scale. You may not know, but you feel something that is just different, better. To the point that later on, working with an NGO from the church in Chile, that was a very bad experience, and we were partnering. They took our designs and in the end robbed the designs. So they were building on their own, and that's why in the end we decided, you know what, here you have the designs for free. And that was this is the kind of things that is better to be shared.
When you're talking about politics, I think, being the leader, and all of them demand me getting into politics, party politics, from architecture fraternity. So I thought I'll use this opportunity, because we have a minister sitting there, last 15 minutes, he's listening so patiently. So politics is not bad. They are not biased. They are very keen to listen what exactly are you guys talking about. I think a big round of applause for the minister. And Unnimaya, our fraternity actor, she's also there. They are very patiently listening for the last 15 minutes. So you could continue talking, or we could call them to the dais. It's your choice now.
Now, we just finished with the thing of the window.
Right.
When they took the designs, when this NGO took the designs, they didn't paint the window black, and it looks as a social housing block.
Because it's got white in there, yes.
Yeah. Thank you.